Some people learned how to be adults before they were even allowed to be children. They didn't complain much. They didn't ask for attention. They handled things quietly. And now, years later, people look at them and say things like, "You're so strong. You never seem to need anyone." But what most people don't realize is that strength was never a choice. It was survival. And if you've ever met someone from Generation X, you may have noticed something strange about them. They seem independent, but distant, resilient, but emotionally guarded, calm in chaos, but uncomfortable with vulnerability. And there's a psychological reason for that. Because Gen X grew up in a world that taught them one message very early in life: handle it yourself. Imagine a kid coming home from school in the late 80s or early 90s. They unlock the front door. The house is quiet. No parents home yet. Dinner isn't ready. There's no one asking how their day was. No one reminding them about homework. They drop their backpack, turn on the TV, make something simple to eat, and they wait. Not for attention, just for time to pass. This was normal. Millions of Gen X kids grew up as what psychologists later called latchkey kids. Both parents working, sometimes divorced, sometimes simply busy surviving life themselves, and without anyone intending harm. An entire generation learned emotional independence very early. But independence has a hidden cost. Because when you grow up solving your own problems, you also learn something deeper. Don't expect help. So Gen X developed a kind of quiet resilience. They figured things out. They learned how to stay calm in uncertainty, how to adapt quickly, how to rely on themselves. That's why many Gen X adults seem incredibly capable under pressure. Work crisis, family emergency, financial stress. They handle it. They've been handling things their entire lives. But beneath that strength, there's often another pattern: emotional self-containment. Because when no one consistently shows up for your feelings as a child, you slowly stop showing them. Not because you're cold, but because vulnerability never felt safe. So instead of saying, "I'm struggling," Gen X often says, "I'm fine," even when they're not. This doesn't mean they don't feel deeply. In fact, many Gen X individuals are incredibly emotionally aware. They just process it privately. They journal. They think. They work through things internally. But asking for support can feel strangely uncomfortable, like something they should already be able to handle alone. And here's where it gets interesting. If you watch how Gen X parents behave with their own children, you'll often notice the opposite pattern. They try very hard to be emotionally present. They listen more. They ask more questions. They encourage their kids to talk about feelings, because somewhere inside them, they remember what it felt like not to have that, and they quietly decided, "My kids won't grow up like that." But even while trying to break that cycle, something else remains: a quiet identity built around self-reliance. Gen X is often called the in-between generation. Too young to have the stability their parents experienced, too old to grow up fully in the digital, hyper-connected world of younger generations. They grew up during massive cultural shifts, rising divorce rates, economic uncertainty, the birth of the internet, the collapse of old systems. So they adapted. They became flexible, skeptical, independent thinkers. They question authority more easily. They trust systems less, and they tend to value authenticity over appearances. But this independence also creates a subtle emotional paradox. They're comfortable being alone, but not always comfortable being supported. They'll help everyone else, but hesitate when the roles reverse. And if you're Gen X watching this, you might recognize something in yourself. Maybe you're the person everyone relies on, the one who keeps things stable, the one who figures things out. But sometimes, late at night, there's a quiet thought that slips in. Who do I lean on? That question rarely gets spoken out loud because Gen X learned early that life doesn't pause for emotional processing. You move forward, you adapt, you deal with it. But psychology tells us something important. The same resilience that protects you can also isolate you. And the same independence that helped you survive childhood can quietly prevent deeper connection later in life. Pause for a moment and think about this. How many times have you solved a problem alone when someone would have gladly helped you? How many emotions did you process silently because that just felt easier? Gen X doesn't struggle because they're weak. They struggle because they became strong too early, and strength, when learned, in childhood often becomes an identity. But identities can evolve. Self-reliance doesn't have to mean self-isolation. Strength doesn't have to mean silence. And independence doesn't mean you were meant to carry everything alone. In fact, the quiet realization many Gen X adults are beginning to have is this: being strong your whole life can be exhausting, and sometimes. The bravest thing isn't handling it alone. It's letting someone see that you don't have to. Because behind every "I'm fine," there's often a story that was never fully heard. And maybe the psychology of Gen X isn't just about independence. Maybe it's about a generation that learned to survive quietly and is only now realizing they're finally allowed to live differently.